28-3. It's a figure, it's a stat that Falcons fans have had to stomach and swallow and cope with and deal with all off season. And what a bitter, crushing defeat that ultimately was. And I'm not here necessarily to rub salt in the wounds. I'm just saying what you already know to be true. That's a hell of a way to go out. For a team that really, frankly, shouldn't even have been in that position, that to me it would have been maybe another year or two away from getting to that spot, the growth curve was accelerated exponentially. The team got hot at the right time, won some games that they needed to win, showed up big in the NFC portion of the playoffs, and then to come out in the Super Bowl and make Tom Brady look old, to make Bill Belichick look overmatched, to have a 28-3 lead more than midway through the third quarter, you're thinking, oh my God, the Falcons are about to do what Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, and the Legion of Boom and the rest of the Seahawks did to Peyton Manning at the end of the 2013 season. That's what you thought was going to happen. You really thought at this point that this was a Super Bowl 48 rewind. The established Hall of Fame quarterback was going to go down in a blaze of smoke and futility. And then, of course, that didn't happen. And Tom Brady decided, hey, I want to be the GOAT. I'm going to try and bring this team back. And then you have some questionable play calling. And the one thing I always say, people always point to Kyle Shanahan and his questionable play calling in the Super Bowl. And I agree 100%. Some of the play calling was incredibly questionable. But where people talk about the lack of running the football in the fourth quarter and in certain situations, and that being the failure, I understand, I get it. But I think the much bigger miss is the fact of you have Julio Jones. You have an absolute beast outside. You had somebody that was established in that game the Patriots couldn't match up with. And you're talking about Julio Jones that was doing the smooth criminal catch down the freaking sidelines. He was targeted 4 times. He caught 4 balls. And there is the problem. Sometimes the best thought out game plans are stupid. When you get to the big moments and you get to the big games, are you going to ride Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman, or are you going to ride your MVP quarterback, Matt Ryan, and arguably one of the 1, 2, or 3 best wide receivers in the National Football League in Julio Jones, who, by the way, Julio was absolutely on fire that night. The fact that Kyle Shanahan only came up with 4 opportunities, ultimately, along with Matt Ryan, to target Julio Jones was a travesty. The fact that this offense didn't intentionally try to force the ball to Julio at least 10 to 12 times in that game, I thought was every bit as big of a failure, if not bigger, than the failure to run the ball in some key spots. And you'll be damned to convince me of otherwise. Sometimes you go with the alpha dogs. And you fuck system, you fuck scheme. You say, these guys are going to be the guys that I roll with. That's great coaching. And at times, even with Belichick, he's been able to fall back and say, Tom, go win this one for us. And that's what he does. And sometimes that's the genius of Belichick, is understanding, even if it's not the way that he wants to run things. Do you think Bill Belichick wants to run an offense the way that he runs an offense now? Hell no. He'd much rather have his team built the way the 2001 to 2004 version of the Patriots were that won 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, including the back-to-back run of 03 and 04. A ball control kind of game managing offense that could occasionally make a big play, but you didn't need to because your defense was really, really good and could get teams out of their rhythm. And that's, you turn the ball over a few times, and that's how you win games. That's Bill Belichick's preferred model. But he's smart enough to understand that that's not the way he's going to win games now, and that's not how he's going to win Super Bowls now. And you've seen that play out 2 of the past 3 years when his team have won the Super Bowl based off of the new design. I thought it was a fundamental failure by Kyle Shanahan, and most importantly, the head coach that could override him in everything, in Dan Quinn, to not say, hey, Julio's a beast. Julio is borderline unstoppable. Julio is on fire. Get the ball to number 11. Get the ball to number 11. Oh, and by the way, knock, knock, who's there? Get the who. Get the ball to number 11, motherfucker. That's who. But now, with that said, you'll look ahead to 2017. And what's staring down the Falcons in the horizon? I mean, what to make of a team that was on this magical ride, that was having what looked to be like this special epic season, become such a crushing disappointment? I mean, you're talking about a team that gave up a 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl. This is uncharted territory. We've never seen a team deal with that type of crushing loss in that way. How does this organization, this team, this set of players, this coaching staff recover from that Super Bowl choke job? And that's exactly what it was. You know, what do you have going for you? Well, you still have Matt Ryan, who was the MVP of the league last year, a franchise quarterback all the way. Which is ironic because I think there were some Falcons fans that were starting to turn on him before 2016. Well, it goes to show what they knew. You've got Julio Jones. What more do I need to say? In the backfield, you have a great 1-2 punch, one of the best 1-2 punches in the entire league, if not the best, and Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman, two guys that could do a lot for you on that offense. Defensively, you've got all types of speed at all levels. You're young. You bring in somebody like Tack McKinley to be another edge rusher that you could pair along with a guy like a Vic Beasley. You've got speed in your linebacking core with guys like Deion Jones and Devondre Campbell. You look at it, you're hoping you get back a Desmond Trufant. In theory, you look at the Falcons and you say, even with some of the concerns I would have about their pass defense, this is a team with an offense that could still win a lot of games and a defense that fundamentally is still young enough where there's still room for growth and improvement to where, in theory, this team could be better in 2017. But you can talk about all the measurables and all the stuff on paper, but that has absolutely nothing to do with the Falcons and their chances in 2017. It's all about, number one, their ability to bounce back. Most importantly, the ability to put what happened in 2016 in 2016 and use it not as something that brings you down, but something that brings you up, that motivates you, that props you up and says, hey, we've got that hunger, that fire. We got so close and we could taste it, but we didn't get it, but we want it and we want it real bad. And we're going to work even harder to make sure that it happens. This is going to be the real test of Dan Quinn as a head coach. You could point to last year and talk about how great he was as a head coach as he got his team to the Super Bowl. If he gets the Falcons to the playoffs this year, that is 10 times the coaching job of whatever he did in 2016. And then you also look at the history of the Super Bowl losers curse. And it's a real thing. It's tough enough to get back to the Super Bowl when you won it the year before. It's tough enough just to get to the Super Bowl, period. But there's something to be said about the Super Bowl losers curse. Now, sometimes that could come because teams get hurt the next year, where the year before they had a great string of luck and were relatively healthy. They lose guys in free agency. But you could say the Falcons, if anything, may be healthier in 2017. They didn't really lose a whole lot in free agency. They add somebody like Dontari Poe. They add somebody, an edge rusher in the draft like Takaris McKinley. So they've added pieces that in theory should make them better, and they've kept pretty much everybody they need to on the offensive side of the ball. So they should at least be close to as good, if not improved, with another year together. But again, you look at that Super Bowl losers curse. And when is the last time a Super Bowl loser went back to the Super Bowl the next year? The answer was the Bills team of the 90s. That, you talk about the 90s season they went, you had Norwood go wide right. And then 91, 92, 93, they went back 3 more times. Each time after they lost again. It hasn't happened since. You look at recent Super Bowl losers. The Carolina Panthers didn't make the playoffs the next year. Think about that. The Seattle Seahawks losing to the Patriots in the way that they did. There's another crushing loss in a different way. Now, granted, they were able to still make it back to the playoffs the following year, but they weren't the same. And frankly, I don't know if that team has ever recovered. I don't know if they've ever recovered. And the fact is, to me, is still, as an organization, in terms of all around, they are a better team than the Atlanta Falcons. And even with that, you talk about the interception at the 1-yard line. This is also a Seahawks team that had won the Super Bowl the year before and didn't piss down their leg a 28-3 lead. I'm just saying, the Broncos of Peyton in 2013, Super Bowl 48, when they got crushed by the Seahawks. The next year, they got bounced by Andrew Luck in the divisional round. The San Francisco 49ers in 2012 didn't make it back to the playoffs the next year. The Patriots in 2011, they made it back to the playoffs, but they didn't make it back to the Super Bowl because they lost in the NFC Championship game, if memory serves me correctly. The point I'm getting at here is it's really tough to get back to the Super Bowl. And in a lot of cases, it's tough for those Super Bowl losers to even get back to the playoffs next year. And we've never seen a team lose in such a devastating fashion. And we're going to find out whether or not they can get back on the right foot. Because 1 year is not in any way an indication potentially of what comes the next year, because every year is different. And there could be a massive amount of things different in 2017. The Falcons could be struck by some bad luck, have some injuries in some bad places. They could play poorly in stretches. And all of a sudden, before you know it, they're out of the mix. So I look at their schedule, and I look at three components of this: beginning, middle, and end, that will give an indication of what the Falcons are this year. They start off the season the first 4 weeks. They go to Chicago, host Green Bay, at Detroit, host Buffalo. The games in and of themselves, maybe week 2, the rematch from the NFC Championship game at home against Green Bay. Maybe there's a confidence there. They do get to start week 1 at Chicago, so that in theory should be a win. But it's all going to be about the way this team starts off the season. Because the hotter the Falcons can start off the season, the better off they can start off the season. The more likely they are to put the stench of the Super Bowl loss and the way they lost the Super Bowl behind them. And they can talk about how it doesn't matter and they compartmentalize it. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. That is impossible for human beings to do. You cannot forget about something that traumatic. You cannot just pretend like it doesn't happen. You know it does, and you know it's something you think about every single day. But if this team can get off to like a 3-1 start in the early portion of their schedule, which they have a chance to, it could mean some good things for them. Then I look at the middle portion of their schedule, week 10 to 12. They've got 3 games against quality teams, 2 of them at home. They host Dallas week 10. They go to Seattle week 11. They host Tampa Bay week 12. There's a stretch right there against 3 potential playoff teams in the NFC, 3 potential division winners at that, for the Falcons to make a little bit of hay and show that they still belong. And then the last 4 weeks of the season, they host New Orleans, go to Tampa, go to New Orleans, come back home, and host Carolina in week 17. They've got 4 straight divisional games to close out the season, which is really perfect for the Falcons if you think about it, because if it's close, if they're in the mix, they really have a chance to control their own destiny when it comes to the divisional race, when it comes to the playoffs, that last 4-week stretch of the season. They really do. So I look at the schedule, and it's not particularly brutal for a team that went to the Super Bowl last year. I look at a team that's brought back everybody that matters on offense, pretty much everybody that matters on defense, and added some pieces of that defense. And in theory, they should be a better team. But I think the reality is the team overachieved a little bit last year, and they're going to regress some this year, even if you didn't have the devastating Super Bowl loss. Now you factor in that devastating Super Bowl loss, and I just wonder and am concerned about how badly this team is going to want it. So I'm probably going to be lower on this team than most people, and that's fine, because I've given it the Jeff curse. If I say they're going to suck, they'll probably make the playoffs, so Falcon fans should be happy. And they can come back in a few months and mock me. But I think this team's going to win 7 games and finish 3rd in the NFC South, because I just think that was too much of a cross to bear what happened last year. And history bears out that the next year doesn't go well for the Super Bowl loser, and especially based off of the way they lost it, I don't know if that team is ever going to recover. Because you can make the argument that up to this point, the Seahawks haven't recovered, and they actually had already won a Super Bowl. What is this going to do for the Atlanta Falcons? It's the biggest single coaching test of Dan Quinn's career. If he gets this team to the playoffs in 2017, I don't care who else does what, he probably should be the NFL coach.